Hello and welcome everyone to the Intrepid Museum's live virtual programming. Thanks so much for joining us today for Star Stories. We're so thrilled that you're tuning in. My name's Alicia. I'm an educator at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York City. I'll be your host today for the program. And just as a reminder, the museum's live streams are free, but if you'd like to support us in delivering this exciting new content, please do click on the link in the comments or in the description. So feel free to use the chat today to say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Let us know maybe if you've ever been to the museum before. And of course, if you've got any questions, you can put them there as well. So today we are going to be talking a little bit about the Intrepid's connection to space. So why we are a space museum. And then we are going to talk a little bit about stars and a few constellations that you can actually find up in the night sky. And also how the stars have been used to help guide people out at sea or all across the world, really, for generations. You see, a long time ago, we didn't really know much about our world other than just what we could really see around us. And it wasn't until we started going up into the sky and really up into outer space that we really got a sense of our planet and the rest of our solar system. And it all started just by looking up. So let's go ahead and get started. Everyone, if you are not familiar, this is the Intrepid Museum. It is actually inside of the former USS Intrepid, which was built in 1943. It served in three wars: World War II, the Cold War, and the Vietnam War. And then it was retired in 1974 and eventually made into a museum in 1982. So we are currently docked right off the shoreline of Manhattan in the Hudson River. Now, if you are local, maybe you have visited before, or maybe you've just passed us along the way. It really is a beautiful thing to see on the outside. It is gigantic. It's so big, and it's really hard to miss, truly. But really, inside is where the magic is and where a lot of our really cool artifacts are. So taking a look at this here, one of these cool artifacts you can see on the right here, this is one of our propellers. We've got 4 propellers on the Intrepid, or had anyway at one point. And the propeller, of course, is the thing that helps to move it through the water. It spins around and it helps to propel it forward. And that, of course, as you can guess, is why we are a sea museum. We are a naval ship. We were out at sea during times of conflict. And in this image on the left here, you can actually see the ship racing along through the water while it was in service. So that's why we're a sea museum, all right? Now, at the Intrepid, though, you definitely will also see a number of planes. That is, of course, one of the things that we're very well known for. And because we carried planes, we actually have a very special name. We are a specific type of ship, all right? So can anyone in the chat tell me maybe what kind of a ship we are? What do you call ships like the Intrepid, these ships that carried airplanes perhaps on them, carried some aircraft? Here are a couple of those airplanes, by the way, that we have. On the right here, that big blue one, the Avenger, all right? That is on our plane in our hangar deck. Sorry, on our ship in the hangar deck from World War II, actually. So this was a torpedo bomber. This is the oldest plane we have on site. Also, on the bottom there, we've got that white one. That is the Fury. So that was a jet plane that flew really, really fast during the Cold War. So planes like these are, of course, why we are an air museum. The Intrepid could actually fit up to 100 planes inside at a time, and it could also launch and land those planes up on our flight deck. So we like to say the Intrepid is kind of like a floating airport, and our ship is something called an aircraft carrier because it carried aircraft across the ocean. But you know, everyone, the space part is sometimes what confuses people. Why are we also a space museum? Well, everyone, take a look at this here. Can anyone tell me what this thing is? All right, we are looking at this big, black, almost light bulb shaped thing that says United States on the side. You can see the US flag there as well. Now, some people, when they look at this, they say it kind of looks like an ice cream cone, maybe that's been tilted on its side, or maybe like a megaphone, something you talk into to be much louder. This, everyone, is something called a space capsule. And it is a very, very special vehicle because this is how astronauts used to go up into space. Now, everyone, looking at it, you can probably see, it's not actually very big, right? Anyone want to take a guess for me in the chat? Maybe how many people do you think could fit inside of this capsule right here? Because capsules like this, everyone, they rode on top of a rocket. Of course, that rocket is the thing that goes up into space. You often see it with lots of fire coming out of the bottom, right, in order to get it up there in space. But then once it gets up there, this thing, the capsule, would separate from the rocket once it's in space. And now you have the capsule just floating up there in order to complete their missions. So, a while ago in the 1960s, during this time called the Cold War, NASA, our space program, was part of something called the space race with the Soviet Union, which is pretty much modern day Russia. And the goal of this race was to get to the moon. But of course, as I like to say, you don't just roll out of bed and end up on the moon. We had to take a number of other steps, a number of baby steps, really, to get there. So these are things like, first figuring out how to even get up into space, figuring out all that rocket power. And then once you're up there, things like how to breathe, right? There's no oxygen up in space for us to breathe, so we got to take it with us. And then other things like eating and sleeping and working for long periods of time while you're up there. So these capsules were actually part of those early steps, what we called Project Mercury. And this particular capsule is the Mercury capsule Aurora 7. This is what it looked like. Now, everyone, here you can also see the guy that was in it. All right, this is Scott Carpenter. And to answer my earlier question, everyone, and I saw we had some answers in the chat. Not sure how many, maybe 4. Okay, Dream of Storm. So actually, if you look closely at this picture, everyone, it's not very big. Just this black part on top is the capsule, and only one person could fit inside of these early Mercury capsules. So again, very, very small, just one person. And again, in 1962, this guy, this astronaut named Scott Carpenter, went up inside of a Mercury capsule that looked just like the one I showed you. Now, have you ever heard that word before? Mercury. Where have you heard that before? What is Mercury? Why do you think they called these missions the Mercury program? Any ideas? Any guesses? Let me know in the chat. If you have ever heard of Mercury, you've probably heard it in conjunction with this, our solar system, right? Mercury is, of course, a planet. And it's actually how it got its name is from Roman mythology. Many of the other planets also have their name from Roman mythology. So Mercury in Roman mythology was the name of the messenger god. He was kind of like their mailman, you could think of it. And he was actually known for being really, really fast in particular. Oftentimes you might see him depicted kind of like this. All right. So if you've ever seen a drawing maybe or a painting of Mercury, the god, you would see he has these big wings on his helmet, and he's got wings on his shoes, and he's got wings on his staff. And all of these wings are supposed to be able to help him to go really, really fast. Again, he's their mailman. We want fast mail, right? So the planet Mercury is actually both our first planet from the sun, and as its name might suggest, it is also the fastest planet. 1 year on Mercury takes just 88 days, while it takes us here on Earth 365 days to go around the sun. So it only takes Mercury 88 days, much, much faster. So America really wanted to be the first and the fastest to get to the moon. So they thought, yeah, Mercury is a great name for this program. So back to the Aurora 7 and Scott Carpenter and these capsules, right? So at this time in the space program, when capsules came back home, they wanted to pick a bit of a softer landing spot for them. They didn't want to land, in a desert or on the side of a mountain or on someone's house or something. So they thought water would be a great kind of softer place. They could splash down into the water. They could have parachutes that came up that would slow them down as they were coming down. And then, of course, afterwards, since they're out there floating around in the middle of the ocean, they would need someone to go and help to pick them up. So a helicopter would come to rescue the astronaut. As you can see on the right here, Scott Carpenter being retrieved after his mission. They would retrieve them and they would fly them to safety. Then divers would actually help to retrieve the capsule. They would then bring it on board the closest ship that was equipped to be able to carry it, something like that, to eventually then end up in, well, somewhere like a museum. Now, the Intrepid, though, was very, very lucky because it got to do this for 2 space missions. It played a very important role in picking up astronauts and their capsules after they returned from outer space. And the pictures you're looking at here are actually from when we picked up Gemini 3. So this was a later mission, but I love this picture on the left here. You can see the side of the Intrepid. You can see all of those sailors lined up, so excited to see an astronaut and capsules, all of these things coming in to them with the divers there in that yellow floaty on the side. So much fun. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is why we are the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. And in fact, if you look at these pictures too, actually, I love these too. You can actually see Scott Carpenter on board the ship right after he was picked up. He's there on the right in his Mercury space suit, that shiny silver suit with all the zippers. I love that old-fashioned retro outfits they used to wear then. Surrounded by officers and onlookers on board the Intrepid after being picked up in 1962. So it was a very, very special occasion. Now, after Mercury, though, Scott Carpenter, was able to come on board. Everything was great. After that, after Mercury, they decided they wanted to get a little bit more complicated, a little bit more progress into this time of being able to go to the moon. So they sent up some other astronauts, as you can see here. We've got Gus Grissom and John Young. They went up inside of that Gemini 3 capsule that I mentioned. And similarly, when they were done, they also splashed down into the water and were retrieved by the Intrepid the same way. But I want to talk a little bit about the name of those missions for a second as well. The Gemini missions. So does anyone know, what does Gemini mean? Tell me in the chat if you know. Take a look at these pictures. Maybe think about how this particular capsule might look a little different than the last one we looked at. And think about what the differences might have been between the Mercury missions that came before it. And remember, again, this is called Project Gemini. So have anyone ever heard the word Gemini? What does that mean? What is Gemini? Where have we heard that before? What does it represent? Are you a Gemini? So everyone, here are those two guys again. All right, so Gus and John. And if you guessed it, yep, Gemini is actually a constellation up in the night sky. Now, what is a constellation? Well, it's basically a picture in the sky that's made up of a grouping of stars. And a long, long time ago, people would actually connect the dots of the stars in the sky to make it look like things, really. And they would tell stories about what they saw. So if you take a look at that Gemini constellation on the right, what does it kind of look like to you? I mean, to me, if you look at the picture on the left too, it kind of looks like two guys, right? So this is actually the constellation of the twins. So thinking about that, thinking about our friends Gus and John here, they went up to space together. Maybe we can connect the dots here as well and start to understand maybe why we called this the Gemini Project. Gemini was the first time that we sent 2 astronauts up into space together. There you go. So everyone, before we move on and look at some stars and other constellations, I want to pause and see if we've got any questions to start us off. Anything about the Intrepid or our early missions into space or anything. Were any other NASA programs named after Greek mythology? Yeah, so actually, pretty much all of them. This Greek and Roman mythology, such wonderful, just classic stories. You've got, of course, Mercury and Gemini, and then, of course, Apollo, right, which took us to the moon, which is kind of ironic, though, because Apollo is actually the sun god, but they really liked this idea of him, pulling his chariot of fire across the sky, and they thought, yeah, these really powerful rockets with all the fire, that it kind of looked similar, right? Of course, you've got these rockets flying across the sky as well. So they thought, yeah, that really represented the mission. And now, of course, coming up, we've got the Artemis missions. Artemis happened to be the twin sister of Apollo, which is very symbolic because the Artemis mission will be the first time that we send a woman to the moon. So we'll be bringing the next man and the first woman back to the moon, hopefully in 2024. All right, so great question. Actually, some other things too, though, that I can mention are the rockets. There's some mythological names of the rockets as well. So we had things like Thor and Atlas and Centaur and Saturn, right? The Saturn V rocket is what brought us to the moon. So we've got spacecraft and we've also got rockets. Other spacecraft are things like Aquarius, which you might have heard of as well. That was a lunar module that ended up being the lifeboat, actually, for Apollo 13. And Orion, which is the newest series of capsules that they're using. So, yeah, this kind of naming tradition just started and it really kept going. Great question. All right, any others? How many constellations are there? So there are actually 88 officially recognized constellations in the night sky. And of those 88, 52 of them are visible from the northern hemisphere. So if you live in New York or somewhere in North America, that is what you're going to be seeing. You're going to see 52 in particular. The constellations that we recognize were originally described by the ancient Greeks and Romans, and they correspond, of course, to this mythology. But of course, they're not the only civilization that saw images in the night sky. Those are just the ones that are the most widely recognized today. But there are many different cultures that saw many different things, and we'll tell some of those stories in a bit. But of course, the most well-known ones are things like Ursa Major and Orion, and of course all the zodiac signs. But there's also some other random ones. There's a unicorn and a giraffe and a microscope. So all sorts of things up there, really. All right, great questions, everyone. So what I'm going to do now, actually, is I'm going to switch to share something else with you here. I'm going to share a program that is called Stellarium. And Stellarium is going to let us look at the night sky as we see it today or in the future, any other time. And we're going to be able to actually look at some of these stars together. Now, we can actually find, I mentioned the Gemini constellation, right? We can actually find Gemini in the night sky, and I'll show you how in a second using this program. Right now, I'm looking at it here. I am in Earth. I am in Earth. I'm on Earth in New York. And this might not look like New York City. If you've ever been to New York City, we don't see any of those big tall buildings and stuff. But you can imagine maybe that we are in Central Park. Maybe we're lying out, in the grass area somewhere. Right now, it's kind of a gross overcast day, so maybe not quite as blue a sky. But just imagine, everyone, this is what the sky looks like in ideal conditions in New York City. But I want to ask you this before we move on here. We're looking at this sky here. Can we see any stars? Don't really see any stars during the day. Although technically, yes, there is one star, everyone. If we take a look right up here, that is, of course, the sun. The sun is our closest neighboring star here. We do love our sun. The sun keeps us warm, of course. But, there is something else to it with this sun here. We've got this thing called the atmosphere, right? And the reason the sky is blue, everyone, does anyone actually know? Let me ask you that. Does anyone know why the sky is blue? Has something to do with the sun, has something to do with our atmosphere. Anyone have any guesses? A lot of people throughout the years have wondered, why is the sky blue? They wonder, is it because maybe so much of the earth is covered by water? So it has something to do with the reflections of the oceans, or maybe there's an ocean up in the sky and, the rain is when it's leaking somehow, right? But no, everyone, the real reason why the sky is blue is because our atmosphere is this bubble, all right? It is this bubble of gases that surrounds our Earth, and it happens to scatter blue light really well. So it takes the light from the sun and it just smears it all around. And that is actually why we can't see stars during the day. So although the atmosphere does a lot of really great things for us living here on Earth, including helping us to have oxygen here so we can breathe, and also, deflecting a lot of these dangerous particles from the sun that are coming in. It's great for that, but again, it's not really great for looking at the stars. Now, technically, again, yes, we do have the sun. The sun is a very large star. We can see the sun, our own special star, but we can't really see stars when that is out. So that's why we want to be able to see the stars during the day. We've got this program. So I'm everyone going to go ahead and get rid of the atmosphere. Don't worry, you can still breathe. Here we go. And so now you'll see actually the sun is still up there, but now we can actually see the stars as well. All right. So the stars are always there. Don't forget that. They are just hidden until the sun goes down because we don't have that blue light smearing all over the place. Now, everyone, when we throughout history have looked up into the night sky, it might have looked like, just a bunch of random white dots, right, on a black piece of paper or a piece of fabric. That's what a lot of cultures actually originally thought it might have been. In fact, the Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest believed that at one point the sky was nothing but darkness. So they said that a young member of their tribe made a mask out of wood and he set it on fire. And then he began to travel across the night sky in order to light it up for us. So effectively, he acted as the sun. And so at night, they say that the stars, when they came out, that was actually the embers that flew out of his mask and kind of burnt holes into this fabric, really, in the sky. But cultures then also started to notice that the stars were always very consistent and the patterns really always stayed the same in the sky, even though they would move slightly as the year would progress. So as they started to realize this, they started to map out the sky and write down all these dots and draw them out. And then they started to identify these groupings of stars, these constellations. Now, remember before I showed you that picture of Gemini, right? The lines were all drawn out and connected. We could see what looked like two people, maybe standing there holding hands. Well, of course, in the night sky, as you can see here, the lines are not there for us. Again, we have to use our imaginations. But what is really, really neat about this particular program is that I can go ahead and add those lines for you. Look at that. So when we're looking at this, everyone, you can see some of those constellations now start to take shape. And also we can see the names for them too. And believe it or not, if we look up into the eastern sky here, around summertime really is when you can see it best. This right here is Gemini. And something else cool about this program is I can actually add the drawings for you as well. So as you can see here, we are looking at the Gemini constellation again, the twin brothers. And now that we're looking more closely at it, seeing again these people drawn out here, you see Castor and Pollux, those two stars on their heads there. So the ancient Greeks actually saw these groupings of stars and they decided to come up with stories to help to really teach lessons or to remind them of gods that were important to them. So the story for Gemini goes like this. They said, once upon a time, there were two boys, Castor and Pollux, again, the names of those stars too, and they were the best of friends. Castor's dad was a regular guy, but Pollux's dad was Zeus, the king of the gods, and that meant that Pollux could live forever. But that didn't bother them. They were best of friends. They did everything together. They played together. They went to school together, and you really never saw one without the other. And then when they got older, they both became great warriors together. But one day, a war broke out in their country. So Castor and Pollux went to go fight in the war together. And then something really sad happened. Castor was killed in battle. So his brother, Pollux, his friend there, was heartbroken because his best friend was gone. So Pollux went to his dad, Zeus, and he said, I know I am supposed to live forever, but I really, really miss my twin brother. So could you let me give half of my forever to him so that I could be with him longer? And Zeus was so touched that his son was willing to give up half of his forever life just to be with him again, that he did something even better. He brought Castor back to life and he let them both live for half of forever. But then when that was up, he put them both up into the night sky so that they would never have to worry about being separated ever again. Isn't that a nice story? So Gemini is, again, a constellation, and it reminds us of, brotherly love. It reminds us of being friends with those that are close to us and the fact that they can always be together up there in the sky. So again, this is a constellation. Can you think of any other constellations maybe that you've heard of, maybe that you see on this screen here? Let me know if you see any in the chat. I will tell you actually, everyone, that there are some very, very common ones that you see. And actually, of course, common ones that you might know of just based on your zodiac sign. If you've ever heard of that before, that has to do with the time of year that you were born. So for instance, if your birthday is today, December 2nd, you would be a Sagittarius, right? And that means that the sun was moving along its path, something called the ecliptic, and that it is currently in that constellation. So let's go ahead and find that, Sagittarius. Here we go. So right now we can't see it, of course, because of the time of year here. Let's go back to now. Here we go. So there's Sagittarius. And that is kind of the half person, half horse constellation there with their bow and arrow. So there we go. That is the Sagittarius constellation in the south right now. So lots of other constellations. But I will say something else that is a very popular star grouping is something called the Big Dipper. All right. Now I have a question for you all. Is the Big Dipper a constellation? Let me know in the chat. What do you think? Is the Big Dipper a constellation? Yes or no? Let's go ahead and find the Big Dipper. Is the Big Dipper a constellation? All right. So everyone, if we look in the night sky, you might see this right here. Here's the Big Dipper all right? If you look at it, you connect the dots with your mind. This part right here, the dipper, of course, being like a spoon, this is the ladle part of it, and here is the handle part of it. So the Big Dipper is pretty easy to find in the night sky, all right? And the answer, if you weren't sure, everyone, the Big Dipper is actually not a constellation in itself. It is part of another constellation, this constellation called Ursa Major, which is the Great Bear. And you can see this Big Bear constellation right here. Now, Ursa Major in particular, so it's in the back half of it, as you can see here. It's this kind of long tail, which is kind of funny because bears don't usually have tails like that, but just go with it. So this is the Big Dipper back here, the back part of it. And it in particular is helpful for us to find something else called the North Star or Polaris. You've probably heard of the North Star before. If you follow the asterism, rather the smaller grouping of stars there, the Big Dipper, if you follow these two stars here, these are called pointer stars. And these two point, if you follow it, here to the tip of Ursa Minor, which is actually the little bear. So the very tip of that tail there is Polaris. That is this North Star, all right? And the North Star, as you can see, happens to be in that cardinal direction of north. Right on the horizon here, you can see that N. That means north. So the North Star is in the northernmost direction. And what's great about it is it can always be found there. Polaris is really important because it's what navigators used to map out the sky. And so really, actually, if you look at this in fast forward, which I love doing this. So right now we're in December, but look what happens when I fast forward through time. Watch this bear constellation here. All right, this Ursa Major. You see how it moves? So I'm moving ahead by months right now. But if you also look at Ursa Minor and Polaris, this star right here in the center, it is not going to move with the rest of the constellations. It always stays in that one spot. So that's really, really helpful. As you can imagine, if you were an ancient navigator and you are out, sailing and everything is pitch black and there's no land and there's no, markers to figure out where you are, to know that there's always that one fixed point that they could always look to know where north was. They could always then also figure out where south or east or west was and where they were at any given point on Earth. Now, there are a number of stories about Ursa Major as well, the Great Bear. And here's one that was told by the Iroquois Native American tribes in the Northeast United States. So they said once upon a time, there was a great and terrible bear terrorizing the land, and it was eating all of the food. And so all of the tribes got together and they decided that they needed to do something about this bear. So they sent their 3 bravest warriors in all of the land to go hunt the bear down. Well, the warriors were really good, but the bear was always just one step ahead of them. So they chased this bear all around the world. They chased him through the mountains, through the oceans, through the deserts. And finally, the warriors were starting to catch up to this bear. So the bear then took this giant running leap and jumped up into the night sky, where the warriors, of course, couldn't follow him. But right before that happened, right before he got into the sky, the bravest of the warriors drew back his arrow and let it go, and it struck the bear in the back leg. Now, the bear got away. He got up into the sky, but the warriors vowed to be ready if this bear were ever to come back down to Earth again. And so they say to this day, the bear is still hiding up in the sky, and every year he comes close to the Earth to see if the warriors are still waiting for him. And they always know if he is getting close because they say a little bit of blood from the bear's injury drips into the trees and starts to change the leaves' colors. So this was actually a way for them to explain seasons. So if you look outside, maybe can you think of a time of year where the leaves on our trees change colors? The fall, right? So they said that this was a time when the bear was coming closer to Earth, and so his blood was going to be dripping down onto the leaves, changing them to that pretty red and orange color. So we can actually look at this using this program here. I'm going to fast forward to about, let's say, 8:30. Here we are, 8:30 at night. All right. So this is the time, when the sun has gone down. This is when we'd be seeing the stars. And if you look at it right now, of course, we are December 2nd. Although we're in 2022. Here we go, 2021. So December 2nd, and here is Ursa Major. Ursa Major, his back leg, that bear's back leg is right on the horizon. So it makes sense. Right now, if you look outside, you are probably going to see that those trees outside, if you're around the New York City area anyway, in the Northern Hemisphere, Northeast, where the Iroquois were, your trees are changing colors right now. They have changed, really. But as we go through the months after this, of course, he's going to start to go away, back up into the sky. So once you get to the spring, he's up there. He's hiding. Now our leaves have started to bud again. Now they're turning green. It's May. He's like way up there, nowhere close. But as he starts to sneak down, when they start to change again, September, now you can see him back on that horizon there. And September, October, November, December, there he is. So that was, again, a way for them to explain their seasons, which I think is just so cool. So everyone, we talked a little bit about asterisms. Again, a smaller grouping of stars within a constellation. Again, the Big Dipper here is an asterism, a smaller grouping. But everyone, there are a bunch of, other clusters of stars that are in the night sky that are very recognizable. Can anyone think of another one maybe that you can think of in the night sky? Another cluster of stars, a grouping of stars, not necessarily a constellation, but something that if you look up into the night sky, you can usually find pretty easily. Maybe because of the way that they're laid out or their brightness. And I'll give you a hint. One that comes to mind for me anyway, happens to do with an article of clothing. All right, an article of clothing, maybe something that helps you keep your pants up. You can think maybe something like that. Be like a belt, perhaps. So everyone, of course, I am talking about this one right here, the constellation of Orion, and particularly his belt. All right. So if we look at this, you can see these three stars in a line right there in the center of that constellation, Orion's belt. Very, very noticeable. And why are they so noticeable? Well, they are grouped very tightly together. They are in that straight line. And really, these are the only stars that we can actually see in the sky that are so close and in a line like that. So it actually does really stand out. So Orion actually has some fun stories along with it too. In Greek mythology, Orion was a great hunter. You can see him there with his bow and arrow. Actually, he killed Taurus, the bull, which you can see in the night sky right next to him right there, actually. How amazing. All right. So he killed Taurus the bull in the mythology. But because of that and because of all the other things he hunted, he thought he was just the best. He bragged about it a lot. And of course, it's not nice to brag, right? It's not nice to go around telling people that you're better than them. Well, Orion happened to be friends with Artemis, again, goddess of the moon and goddess of the hunt. And she respected animals, and she believed that you should really only kill them if you needed them for food or for survival, not just for fun, not just for sport. So Orion kept wanting to show off, just kept killing animals for fun. And so the other gods started to take notice of this, and they decided to punish Orion for and they sent him as punishment a giant scorpion after him. And the scorpion's name is Scorpius. So everyone, if you are a Scorpio, that also has to do with the time of year you're born. But so Scorpius and Orion fought long and hard, and they say to this day they are still chasing each other through the night sky. But here's the really interesting thing. You actually will never see the two of them out at the same time because they are on opposite sides of the sky. So if we fast forward time here, everyone, you can actually see this in action. All right, so follow along here. Here's Orion. Again, keep your eye on Orion. Orion is setting down here in the west, all right? There he goes. So he's going down there. But if we look over here on the other side of the horizon, you're going to see coming up over here, Scorpius. So again, Orion has just gone down and Scorpius is now just coming up. Scorpius then starts to climb across the sky, as you can see here, and goes down. And as he goes down, after a bit, we will see again Orion come up. So that is their punishment, everyone. The fact that they will never catch each other and he will never be able to slay. There's Orion again. They will never be able to slay Scorpius as he's always rising and going and they're always just chasing each other around. So that's Orion. And everyone, Scorpius actually has something else associated with it as well that I love to point out. Let's pull up Scorpius again. There he is. Scorpius, as you can see here, this kind of, S-shaped tail here. It kind of looks like a fish hook, right? And it's actually the same constellation as Maui's fish hook. So if you've ever seen the movie Moana, which is set in Polynesia, right, in the Pacific Ocean, that is the hook that the demigod Maui used to pull up the Pacific Islands, like Hawaii, in their legends. So that is a famous Polynesian tale. And there's another Polynesian tale actually also associated with Orion as well. Kind of interesting that they have that bond. So let's go back to Orion. Here he is. So there's another story about Orion, and actually in particular having to do with that asterism of his belt that is very noticeable. They saw it as something different in Polynesia. This story is actually about a little girl and a baby shark. So in Tonga, which is an island near Fiji, out in the Pacific, the three stars that form Orion's belt tell the story of Hina and her pet shark. So Hina was a beautiful young girl, and one day her brothers were fishing and they caught a baby shark for her. So they gave it to Hina as a present, as a pet for her birthday, and they created this little pool in the reef where they lived, where the shark could live, and Hina would watch over it, and just absolutely loved her pet shark. But one evening, they had a very violent storm, and it blew down a whole bunch of their buildings on the island, and it damaged the reef where the shark was living. So at that time, the waters rose up, it swept the shark out into the big wide ocean, and it swam away. So Hina was devastated. She was so sad, and she begged her parents to take her out to sea to go find her pet shark. So she and her parents climbed into a canoe. They searched far and wide until finally they saw a fin emerge from the waters. And Hina just knew that that was, in fact, her pet shark. So she begged and begged and begged the shark, please come home with me. Please return with me. I miss you so much. But the shark had tasted freedom. The shark was not into that. He did not want to go back to his tiny little reef pool. He was bigger now. He had tasted the great outdoors. Wasn't really interested in going back. So Hina was very upset. She couldn't bear to be parted from her friend. So she prayed and prayed and prayed, and their canoe rose up into the heavens and became the stars that they call Alatulu, which means three in a boat. So they say that that is actually Hina and her parents up in the sky, staying there with their pet baby shark. Isn't that a fun story? But you hadn't heard that one. So that is another constellation, or rather asterism story related to Orion's belt that they tell out in Polynesia. All right, so my friends, let's pause here. Let's see if there are any other questions. Any questions about constellations or anything like that? Are there other constellation stories about the seasons? Oh, a ton of them. Because again, as you can imagine, these stars were a way that they could kind of explain some of these otherworldly occurrences, things like the trees changing color or this frozen water falling from the sky, right, that we know as snow. So the constellation of Virgo is actually often depicted as, a beautiful maiden. She's also recognized in many cultures, though, for being the bringer of spring. So the ancient Greeks linked that constellation in particular to their myth about Persephone, who was the goddess of the spring. If you know that one, Persephone is the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. And one day she's out, gathering flowers and things. And then Hades, the god of the underworld, kidnaps her and brings her to the underworld. So her mom obviously is very upset, and she stops working. And she's just beside herself. She's very, very upset about this. And so as a result, as the goddess of the harvest, the earth just turns cold and dries up and there is no harvest. So finally, Zeus realizes this is causing a lot of problems and declares, nope, Persephone needs to be returned to her mother. So Hades lets her go. But right before doing that, he offers a feast in her honor, and she eats a few pomegranate seeds. And they say because she tasted the food of the dead, she then had to spend half of the year in the underworld with him. So they say whenever Persephone goes to the underworld each year, Demeter mourns, and it's winter time, but then it's springtime when she comes to return to the land. And it's actually the same thing with the Virgo constellation. I'll show you in a second, actually. In the spring and the summer, you can see it overhead, but then it goes down on the horizon during the winter time. Let's pull up Virgo so you can see that. Virgo. There we go. All right. So again, right now, March, she's under there, but there she is. So June. All right. June, she's coming up over the horizon. July, August, she's high in the sky. But then as you see, she starts to duck back down and about, actually, let's do this at 8 o'clock at night. So which is when you'd actually see it. There we go. All right. So in, March, April, springtime, she's up here and she's high in the sky. But then once you get to the fall, there she is ducking back down in the horizon again until you really only see her foot in October. So there you go. That is the Virgo one. All right. Any other questions? Why can't we see many stars in New York City? Yeah, great question, right? So I mentioned the sun scatters lots of light around the atmosphere during the day, and it covers up the stars, right, with the blue light. But the same thing actually happens coming up from Earth at night here in New York as well, or really any big city. So if you've got a lot of lights, a lot of street lights or cars or tall buildings like we have here in the city, it's actually emitting something called light pollution. So just like you have pollution that's like smog or dirt or something like that from factories or cars and things, there's also pollution that is caused by light. And the light, gets scattered throughout the sky. It also blocks out our ability to see those stars too. But if you ever happen to go camping or, somewhere that's just a bit out of the way from all of the lights of the city, maybe you live somewhere that's, out on a farm somewhere, maybe it's very dark out there, you'll actually see billions of stars. It's really, really incredible. Stargazing can, be a little tricky here in the city. We can absolutely see a bunch of them on clear nights, and it's helpful to have telescopes too. We do wonderful stargazing activities on the flight deck of the Intrepid actually during the summertime. So we invite you to check those out too in the coming year. But yeah, you definitely don't see as many as you would see out in the desert or something like that. Great questions. All right. So, everyone, if you've ever seen Moana, I mentioned Moana again. When you see her out there, she is adventuring in the ocean, right? So, you might have seen her use some special tricks while she's out on her boat, something called celestial navigation. So, she uses the stars to figure out kind of where she's going. And remember, we said Polaris, the North Star, was really great at helping sailors to find their way, to figure out where North was, because it was always in that one spot. Well, the ancient navigators also had a few other tricks up their sleeves too to figure out where they were in the world, and kind of literally because they used their hands. Now, it is certainly not the most precise way of doing things. Eventually, they developed gadgets to help them out. But I'm going to teach you a few things here that you can do with just your hands. So we are going to be looking at something called latitude for this. So if you've ever seen a map, you might notice sometimes there are lines that go either up and down or side to side. And these are coordinate lines. They're called latitude and longitude. And they can actually help you to pinpoint exactly where something is. And especially if, you're out sailing in the ocean, that's going to be really helpful too. Now, the equator is that line that goes around the center of the earth, right? We like to say that that line is at 0 degrees latitude. And then depending on wherever you go, either above that line or below that line, you are either going north or south and that number of degrees. All right. So the Intrepid actually used coordinates just like that when it was sailing too. But of course, they had much fancier gadgets to tell them where they were. But let's pretend, all right, you're outside, you're in a canoe somewhere, you're out looking up at the sky. If you were to extend your arm out, I'm going to sit back here a little bit. If you were to extend your arm out at that relative distance, all right, the width of your pinky finger is said to be 1 degree. All right, so that's 1 degree. The width of your knuckles across your hand is 10 degrees. So fist, basically. And then the length of the whole span of your hand outstretched from your thumb to the top of your fingers is about 20 degrees. So based on all of those measurements, everyone, you can actually count how many degrees up from the horizon the North Star is, depending on where you are, to determine what your latitude is. So again, how far north you are on the planet. So New York, for instance, is just over 40 degrees north on a map. And I can show you that on this program. Give me a second, pull back up here. So again, remember I told you the North Star is, here we go. The North Star is always going to be in the same place, right? So we're looking at that. And if you look at this map now, I've put on a grid here for you. This line right here, each of these lines is going to show you a particular degrees. So the first line here, as you can kind of see over here in the corner, says 20 degrees. And the second one up here is 40 degrees. Now, again, we're looking at Polaris, the North Star right here. And you'll see it is just about on that 40-degree line. And so we are in New York City. You will see that about 40 degrees up, which is really kind of amazing, right? So you could figure that out a few ways, right? You could either, go fist over fist here 4 times. That would be 4 fists up from the horizon. Or you could also do 2 hand spans up from the horizon like that. And that would put you at 40 degrees and you're in New York City. But let's say you're not in New York City. Let's say you are in Mexico. Let's say you live in Mexico City. That's actually 20 degrees north. So same thing. You could just do 2 fists like that. or just one of your outstretched hands like that. And the North Star, Polaris, should actually be right about where that is if you have the bottom of your finger on the horizon. So wherever you are, you can actually estimate how far north you are just based on using your hands and the North Star. Isn't that so cool? Now, the other thing to point out, though, is that did you know that people who live in the southern hemisphere, so south of the equator, people like Moana, they actually can't see the North Star. It's true. They just can't see it. It's not there for them. So they don't have that. They don't have that little helpful thing to be able to refer to and, count it with your hands. So we see some constellations, though, that they also can't see here in the northern hemisphere, but they see a few that we can't see here because the Earth is slightly tilted on its axis. So if we were to take a look at the southern sky really fast, let's change our location to, let's say, Australia. Alrighty, so we're going to use this location. Here we are. This is Australia. So again, you're going to see some of the things that I showed you before, but maybe a little bit unusual. For example, Ursa Major's upside down now. Isn't this so interesting? Everything's a little bit unusual. You're also going to see some other constellations that maybe you haven't seen before. Some other things here, all right? But in particular, I want to point out something else here. All right, so some things, again, first of all, different. We've got Scorpius, right? I mentioned Scorpius is there as well. Again, the Maui's fish hook is something that they can see very clearly around the Hawaiian Islands there. But something in particular that they use that is not the North Star, but is kind of like the southern star, southern point that they can look at here. It's something called the Southern Cross in particular. It's this thing called crux right here. All right, so crux, and let me actually turn off these things here. Well, I'll leave this one on. Crux is this thing here, the Southern Cross, all right? Crux is very helpful for them to figure out where the southern point is. They call it the Southern Cross because it's a cross that points to the southern point. But it's not that easy, actually. There's something else that they have to use. They also have pointer stars. I mentioned that in Ursa Major, in the Big Dipper, really, you have the pointer stars that point to the North Star. Here they've got some other pointer stars that are these right here, these two stars. These two stars here are bright. They are also in kind of a straight line. And they also point to the Southern Cross. But in order to figure out what the southern point is, which you can actually see here, if it's over here, what does that mean? So here's how they figure it out. And this is a little confusing, but go with me here. They take this line here of crux, all right? They follow this line straight down, all right? So just imagine there's a straight line going down here, great? One line right here. Okay. The other thing is they take these pointer stars. They take the midway point of the pointer stars and they draw a line right here and they draw that line straight down. So if you imagine you've got a line here and a line here, at the point that the two intersect, so the point where they cross, that is your southern point. So if we're looking at here, we got one here and we got one here. Just so happens if you use your imagination to line up with this. So once you find that southern point, you go straight down to the horizon. And that's where your southern point is. So it's a little more complicated. It's certainly a little trickier. They do have to do a little mental math in order to figure it out. But that is how you are able to find the southern point. And actually, that southern point, again, as though you were looking at it as a North Star, right? If you imagine there's a star there, where those two lines intersect would be that degree, right? It would be that point that you could figure out where you are. So again, if you're looking at crux, the line goes down here. The Alpha Centauri and the Hadar ones are going here. And where it intersects is here, which is 20 degrees south, which also happens to be Australia, where we are. So it does work, believe it or not. Again, it's a little bit complicated if you're in the southern hemisphere. But now, if you ever happen to be out lost at sea, just like Moana, you can find your latitude and help you find your way home. And of course, what can I say except you're welcome. So I will say, though, everyone, yes, being in the northern hemisphere, it does make it a little bit easier if you happen to be lost. Otherwise, most people have gadgets now. Everyone's got smartphones and things like that, GPS, where we can figure that out. A lot easier in the northern hemisphere to just look at the North Star, though. So we are thankful for that. Now, one other thing, everyone, that I want to point out, before we wrap up for today is the fact that there are other things that you can see in the night sky. Ancient cultures, saw obviously these star groupings, but they also noticed some other really big bright stars that rather than staying put, they seem to kind of be moving or wandering through the night sky. So the ancient Greek actually named them for the word that means wanderer, which is planetes. And just like it sounds, that was where we get the word planets today. Now we can actually see the planets in our night sky. The one that's actually pretty obvious and very visible a lot of the time is, of course, Mars. So if we take a look at Mars, let me fast forward just a bit in time here. Ooh, or backwards in time. There we go. So here's Mars. We can see it right now anyway. Are we today? Yes, we are today. So right now we can see it kind of in this, where are we? In this kind of southerly direction here. Very close to the moon at the moment, actually. So here's Mars. And of course, Mars, if you see it in the night sky, it is red. And that has to do, again, with its name. We get this naming convention from the Romans. Mars was the god of war. And they say it was like a big red glowing eye up in the sky, the god of war. You think of red, you think of blood and war and anger, right? So it actually gives off that color because of all of the iron oxide that's covering the surface of Mars, which we are learning a lot about right now. You can really see there's that dusty layer around it. That red kind of dust just all over it. But we're learning a lot about it because we sent up the Perseverance rover up there earlier this year to search for possible signs of past life. It's currently up there in a location called the Jezero Crater. So they think it might have been an ancient river delta and lake. And of course, where there's water, there tends to also be life. So there we go. So there's Mars. Easy to find up in the night sky too if you look for that red glowing eye up in the sky. But again, those move as well. So a little different than those stars. So my friends, that is the end of our program here, our star stories for today. But I do want to see if we've got any last questions before we wrap up. Why do stars twinkle? Oh, yeah. So stars, they often give off that kind of flickering, kind of twinkling movement a bit. Someone should write a song about that, right? But, it's actually light that's bending as it's coming in through our atmosphere. I mentioned before, it's those gases that kind of blurs around that blue light from the sun, but it actually is also bending it, the light of the stars as well. So as it comes through, it kind of looks like they're twinkling, kind of flickering a little bit. But it's kind of an illusion to us. But kind of interesting, when you go up into space, the stars look different. They're a lot more steady because that's kind of an added little special effect that we get here on Earth. But they don't have the atmosphere up there. So they're a lot steadier up there. They don't twinkle as much. Good question. Any others? How many stars are in the universe? So in a nutshell, we don't know. Scientists are discovering new stars literally every day. But I believe I read once that there are at least 70 sextillion stars that are known. So that's a 7 with, I think, 22 zeros after it. So that's a lot. Now, of course, that we can't see them all from here. I think that number that we actually can see from here is closer to 7,000 or 8,000. Certainly a lot less if you live in New York City. But there's also this idea to kind of wrap your head around it a bit, is if you took every grain of sand that's here on Earth, at every beach, everywhere, and you added it all up, every little tiny little piece, and you counted that, there would still be more stars than even that out there in the universe. So it's a lot to wrap your head around for sure. But it's exciting because we're always discovering new things. And of course, where there's a star, it could be a sun for some other distant Earth, perhaps. And those are exoplanets, right? So who knows? Maybe there is life out there surrounding some other distant star too. That's a lot. 7 with 22 zeros, right? All right, everyone. So thanks so much for tuning in today. If you've got any other questions about our programs, you can reach out to us through our website, intrepidmuseum.org, or also through any of our other social media channels. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing your comments and your questions today. The museum, of course, hosts a number of live streams just like this, so please do follow and subscribe to our channel and visit our website for the latest streaming schedule. And also, if you like this or any of our past programs, we would love your feedback as well. So there's a link in the chat for you. I encourage you to go ahead and click on it to answer some questions that'll help us to plan for future sessions. Our next family program is next week on Thursday at 3 p.m., and it's going to be Tales from Pearl Harbor. So, in commemoration of the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, that led, of course, to American involvement in World War II, we are going to be telling a few little known stories about that day. So, really going to be an interesting program. We encourage you to tune in for that. Once again, that is next Thursday at 3 p.m. right here on our streaming platforms. So, thanks so much for joining us again. Our museum is open to the public 7 days a week from 10 to 5 p.m. So, if you are in the area, come on by and say hello. Otherwise, we hope to see you online for another virtual Intrepid adventure. Thanks so much. See you next time, everyone.